Hello, and welcome to the channel. The story you're about to hear is about a bastard orphan from a forgotten Caribbean island who became the architect of American capitalism. It reveals what happens when brilliant ambition meets catastrophic loss, when a boy with nothing builds everything through the power of words alone. How does genius emerge from ruin? What does it cost to escape the circumstances of your birth? The wind is screaming through Christiansted on the night of August 31st, 1772. The town is being torn apart, timber by timber, roof by roof. In a counting house on King Street, a 17-year-old clerk named Alexander Hamilton sits at a desk by candlelight, writing. The shutters are banging against the walls. Rain drives horizontal through cracks in the boards. Outside, the hurricane that will kill dozens and devastate the island of St. Croix is reaching its peak fury. And this young man, this illegitimate nobody with no prospects and no family, is composing an essay. He describes the thunder as, quote, 0. He calls the hurricane, quote, 1. He writes as if someone important might read these words, as if his observations matter, as if he matters. He has no reason to believe any of this is true, but he writes anyway, and that act of writing will carry him across an ocean to a destiny he cannot possibly imagine. To understand how Alexander Hamilton arrived at that desk on that night, we must go back 17 years to another island, smaller and more beautiful, where his story begins in scandal. Nevis, a green volcanic peak rising from turquoise water, 11 miles of sugar estates worked by enslaved Africans, a society of rigid hierarchies and whispered gossip. Here, around 1755, the exact date is uncertain, which will haunt him. A boy is born to Rachel Fawcett Levian and James Hamilton. There is no marriage. There can be no marriage. Rachel is still legally married to another man, a Danish merchant named Johan Levien, who refuses to grant her a divorce. Under the law, the children she bears with James Hamilton are illegitimate. They have no legal standing, no claim to inheritance, no social position. Rachel's story is the kind of scandal that never quite fades in a small island society. Married young to Levien, she'd fled the marriage, been imprisoned by her husband for alleged infidelity, escaped to St. Kitts. James Hamilton, younger son of a Scottish laird, had arrived in the Caribbean seeking his fortune and found instead this beautiful, complicated woman with a ruined reputation. They made a life together, moving between islands, James always chasing the next business opportunity, never quite finding success. 2 sons, James Jr., then Alexander. The household exists in permanent precariousness. James Hamilton is a dreamer, charming and feckless, always certain that fortune is just around the corner. Rachel is practical, running a small shop to supplement his irregular income. The boys grow up knowing they're different, that the whispers follow them, that their status is conditional and fragile. When Alexander is 10, perhaps 11, James Hamilton leaves, just disappears from their lives, drifting to another island, another failed venture. He will write letters occasionally, but he will never return. The abandonment is absolute. Rachel is left with 2 boys, a shop, and a reputation that makes her vulnerable to every creditor. She moves them to St. Croix, the largest of the Danish West Indies. Christiansted is a real town, substantial buildings, merchant houses, a cosmopolitan port. Rachel works harder, managing to keep them fed and clothed. Alexander helps her, learning the rhythms of commerce, the careful accounting. But he's also reading everything he can find. There's a small library in town, perhaps 30 books, and he devours them. Plutarch's Lives, with its portraits of great men. Alexander Pope's translations of Homer. Whatever he can borrow or buy used. The letters he writes to his absent father show a mind far beyond his years. Elaborate sentences, classical allusions, an almost desperate sophistication. He's performing precocity, trying to impress, trying to matter. The island feels too small, the future too narrow. In February 1768, when Alexander is perhaps 13, Rachel Fawcett dies. A fever, sudden and final. The aftermath is a cascade of humiliations. Because she was never divorced from Lavian, her legitimate son, a half-brother Alexander barely knows, inherits what little she had. Alexander and his brother James inherit nothing. The furniture is sold at auction. The boys watch their childhood disperse to strangers. James Jr. is apprenticed to a carpenter. Alexander, perhaps because someone recognizes something in him, is taken in by merchant Thomas Stevens and given a position as clerk at the trading house of Beekman and Kruger. He's 14, alone, and working full-time in a counting house that trades rum, sugar, lumber, salted meat, and slaves. The ledgers record human beings as cargo, and Alexander's neat handwriting tracks their value in pounds sterling. But he's brilliant at it. Nicholas Kruger, the owner, quickly realizes this boy can do more than copy figures. When Kruger falls ill and must leave the island for months, he leaves the teenage Alexander in charge. 17 years old, running an international trading operation, writing letters to sea captains and merchants in New York and Curacao with absolute authority. The letters survive, and they're extraordinary. He writes to one captain who delivered damaged goods. This is not how clerks address ship captains. This is not how teenagers speak to men 3 times their age. But Alexander Hamilton does, because somewhere in the wreckage of his childhood, he's decided that talent and will matter more than birth, that he can write himself into existence. Then, in April 1771, his cousin Peter Lytton, Rachel's nephew, who had taken some responsibility for the orphaned boys, commits suicide. The details are murky, perhaps debt, perhaps despair. Alexander is alone now in a way that's almost absolute. No mother, no father within reach, no family. The hurricane comes in August 1772, and Alexander writes his essay. He shows it to Reverend Hugh Knox, a Presbyterian minister who has become something like a mentor. Knox is astonished. He sends it to the Royal Danish-American Gazette, which publishes it. The essay circulates. People read it and marvel. Who is this boy who writes like this? A collection is taken up. The merchant community, the Presbyterian Church, perhaps a dozen men pooling funds. Enough to send him to North America for an education, to give him a chance. It's an extraordinary act of collective faith in potential. In October 1772, Alexander Hamilton boards a ship for Boston. He carries letters of introduction, a few pounds, and that unshakable conviction that words can remake the world, the islands that made him disappear behind. He will never return to the Caribbean, but the Caribbean will never leave him. That sense of precariousness, the knowledge that everything can be lost in an instant, the desperate need to build something that cannot be taken away. The ship rolls north into autumn waters, and somewhere on that voyage, the island boy begins imagining himself as something else entirely. The ship from St. Croix reaches Boston in October 1772, and Alexander Hamilton steps onto a continent he's never seen. The cold startles him. He's never experienced autumn before. The way the air bites, the leaves turning colors that don't exist in the Caribbean. Everything is different. The buildings are wooden, not stone. The people are pale, dressed in layers he doesn't own. And there are no enslaved people visible on every corner, no sugar works, no tropical ease masking brutal labor. This is a harder place, a colder place, and he loves it immediately. Boston is tense with politics, but Hamilton doesn't stay long. His letters of introduction lead him south to New York, and it's New York that will claim him, that will become his city in a way the islands never were. He arrives in early 1773, carrying his few possessions and his bundle of recommendation letters. One letter connects him to Hercules Mulligan, a tailor with connections to the Sons of Liberty, and Mulligan takes him in as a boarder. The household becomes his first real home on the mainland. Mulligan is gregarious, political, plugged into the networks of resistance forming against British policy. At his dinner table, Alexander hears the arguments, absorbs the vocabulary of natural rights and constitutional precedent, begins to understand the crisis that's building. But first, he needs education. His Caribbean schooling is irregular, full of gaps. He applies to Princeton, proposing to study at his own accelerated pace. They refuse. So he turns to King's College in New York, a small Anglican institution with perhaps 20 students. And they accept him. He's 18, maybe 19. He's already begun lying about his birth year, making himself younger, giving himself more time to achieve. King's College sits on the west side of Lower Manhattan. The president is Miles Cooper, a Tory loyalist who will come to rue the day he admitted this particular student. Hamilton throws himself into study with ferocious intensity. Greek, Latin, mathematics, rhetoric. He reads Plutarch's parallel lives of great Greeks and Romans, absorbing the lessons about honor and ambition. He devours Hume's essays on political economy. He studies Demosthenes, the Athenian orator who rallied his city against Philip of Macedon, and something in those ancient speeches about defending liberty against empire speaks directly to his situation. Late at night, after his formal studies, he writes essays, fragments of poetry, letters to friends describing this new world. The ideas are getting sharper, the prose more confident. He's forming a political philosophy. Government exists to protect natural rights. Taxation without representation is tyranny. The British Constitution is being violated by Parliament's overreach. Through college connections, he meets the Livingston family, one of New York's great aristocratic clans. William Livingston is a lawyer and writer, a patriot intellectual. His son-in-law, John Jay, is brilliant and cautious, already marked for leadership. They see something in this slight, intense young man with the island accent and the penetrating stare. They invite him to their homes, include him in conversations. For Hamilton, it's intoxicating. He's being welcomed into exactly the circles he dreamed about on St. Croix. Then comes December 1773, and news of the Boston Tea Party reaches New York. The city divides sharply. King's College is loyalist territory, but the streets outside are increasingly patriot. Hamilton attends mass meetings, watches the crowd dynamics, sees how political movements form. In the summer of 1774, he publishes his first political pamphlet, Quote, "He's 19 years old, anonymous, and writing with sophisticated constitutional arguments that assume he's much older, much more educated than he is. The pamphlet is a sensation. Someone named, quote, 1, actually Samuel Seabury, an Anglican minister, has been attacking the Continental Congress. Hamilton's response is systematic and brutal. He dismantles Seabury's arguments about commerce and natural law, quotes Blackstone and Locke, builds a case for resistance. When Seabury responds, Hamilton writes, quote, 2 even longer, even more sophisticated, 35 pages of close constitutional reasoning and revolutionary rhetoric. People start trying to identify the author. The prose is too good, the learning too deep. It must be John Jay, or William Livingston, or some other established figure. When they discover it's Hamilton, the college student, the immigrant, the slight young man who looks even younger than his years, the surprise elevates him. He's marked now as someone to watch. The political crisis accelerates through 1774. The intolerable acts close Boston Harbor. Hamilton is everywhere, at mass meetings, in coffee houses, arguing, persuading. He joins a volunteer militia company, drilling in the churchyard. He's never held a musket before, but he learns quickly, and the other young men elect him an officer. There's something about his certainty, his fearlessness, that makes people follow him. He's also navigating a delicate position at King's College. President Miles Cooper is an outspoken loyalist, preaching obedience to the crown. The Patriot students are increasingly hostile, but Hamilton maintains cordial relations with Cooper, even while undermining everything he stands for in print. It's political sophistication beyond his years, this ability to separate personal regard from political opposition. The breaking point comes in May 1775. News of Lexington and Concord reaches New York. British regulars and colonial militia have exchanged fire in Massachusetts. War has begun. New York explodes. Mobs form, seeking out known loyalists. On the night of May 10th, a crowd gathers outside King's College, demanding Cooper be dragged out and tarred and feathered. Hamilton places himself between the mob and the college gate. He's 20 years old, barely 5'7", facing down dozens of men. He begins to speak, and somehow his voice cuts through the noise. He argues for restraint, for order, for the rule of law, even in revolution. This is not how patriots behave, he tells them. This is mob rule, and mob rule destroys what they're fighting for. He talks for perhaps 30 minutes, buying time while Cooper escapes out the back, fleeing to a British warship in the harbor. The crowd eventually disperses. Cooper is gone. King's College will soon close. And Hamilton has proven something. He can face down violence with words, can impose his will through rhetoric and nerve. It's a lesson he'll carry into the war that's now inevitable. By summer 1775, Hamilton has stopped pretending to be a student. He's drilling with his militia company daily, studying military tactics, preparing for the fight he now knows is coming. The Caribbean boy who arrived knowing nothing of winter, nothing of continental politics, has become a New Yorker, a revolutionary, a voice that matters. He writes to John Jay that summer, and the letter shows how far he's come. The uncertainty of the island orphan is gone. In its place is absolute conviction. Independence is necessary. Victory is possible. History is calling. He's ready to answer. In the winter of 1776, Alexander Hamilton is cramming military knowledge the way he once crammed Greek and Latin. His room at the Mulligan House is filled with borrowed artillery manuals, treatises on tactics, diagrams of cannon placement, and trajectory calculations. He's never fired a cannon in his life, but he's determined to command an artillery company. The mathematics of gunnery, the chemistry of powder, the logistics of moving heavy guns across rough terrain. He approaches war the way he approaches everything, as a problem that can be solved through intense intellectual effort. The New York Provincial Company of Artillery accepts him as captain in March 1776. He's 21 years old, commanding men older and larger than himself. But something in his bearing, his absolute certainty, makes them follow. He drills them relentlessly. His company becomes known for precision, for the captain, who's always studying, always calculating angles and distances. The summer of 1776 brings the largest military force Britain has ever assembled across an ocean. 30,000 soldiers, hundreds of ships, facing colonial militia. Washington gathers the Continental Army in New York, and Hamilton's artillery takes position in Lower Manhattan. When the British land on Long Island in August, the battle is a disaster. Washington evacuates across the East River in the night, and Hamilton's guns are among the last to withdraw, covering the retreat. What follows is months of running. The British take New York, pushing Washington's army north through Westchester, across the Hudson, through New Jersey. Hamilton's artillery fights rear-guard actions, buying time for the main army to escape. At White Plains, at Fort Lee, his guns fire and withdraw, fire and withdraw. The army is melting away through desertion and expired enlistments. By December, Washington has perhaps 3,000 men left, and the cause seems lost. Hamilton's company crosses into Pennsylvania with the remnants. They're exhausted, poorly fed, many without shoes. The Delaware River flows between them and the British. Trenton sits on the far side, held by Hessian mercenaries who think the war is essentially over. Washington knows he needs a victory before the army simply dissolves. Christmas night, 1776. The crossing of the Delaware in darkness and ice. Hamilton's artillery company is in the boats, the guns wrapped and protected. They land on the Jersey shore at dawn and march on Trenton through snow. When the attack comes, Hamilton's guns are positioned at the head of King Street, firing down into the town. The Hessians are caught completely by surprise. The battle is short and brutal, and when it's over, nearly 1,000 enemy soldiers are captured. Hamilton's guns perform flawlessly. Washington notices the young captain with the booming voice, directing fire with mathematical precision, utterly calm under pressure. But what sets Hamilton apart comes clear in the days after Trenton. The army recrosses the Delaware, then crosses back again, taking position at Trenton with the British gathering for counterattack. On January 2nd, 1777, Cornwallis advances with overwhelming force. Washington's army is trapped with its back to the river. That night, leaving campfires burning to fool the British, Washington marches the entire army around Cornwallis's flank in darkness, heading for Princeton. At Princeton, on the morning of January 3rd, the armies collide unexpectedly. The American advance guard breaks under British fire, threatens to rout. Hamilton brings his guns forward at a gallop, unlimbers them 40 yards from British lines, insanely close, and begins firing. The noise is tremendous. Men are falling around him, but his guns keep firing. grape shot tearing into British ranks. The line stabilizes. Washington rallies the troops, and the British break instead. That night, Washington is writing dispatches by candlelight. He asks an aide about the young artillery captain. Who is he? The answers intrigue him. Student, immigrant, brilliant writer. Washington needs writers. The Continental Army runs on correspondence, and Washington himself is not a natural prose stylist. He needs someone who can translate his thoughts into clear, forceful language. In March 1777, Alexander Hamilton becomes aide-de-camp to the commander-in-chief, with the rank of lieutenant colonel. He's 22 years old, and he's just entered the room where history happens. Washington's military family, his staff of aides, becomes Hamilton's world. They work from pre-dawn until late at night, drafting letters to Congress, to other generals, to governors begging for supplies. Hamilton's handwriting appears on dozens of documents, but it's not just copying. Washington increasingly trusts him to compose letters independently, and Hamilton's voice, sharp, precise, occasionally caustic, begins appearing in official correspondence. He writes sometimes 40 letters in a day to Congress, explaining why the Army needs a professional staff system, to generals requesting troop movements, to state governors begging for food and clothing. The letters reveal Hamilton's growing frustration with how the war is being conducted. The Continental Congress has no power to tax, no ability to compel the states to supply the army. Everything depends on requests and goodwill, and both are in short supply. Hamilton watches the soldiers suffer through the winter at Morristown, 1777, and his letters grow more pointed. The system is broken. Confederation without central authority cannot fight a war. He's learning political economy through the negative example of its absence. But headquarters isn't all work and frustration. There are social occasions, balls and dinners with the families that host the army. At Morristown, Hamilton meets Elizabeth Schuyler, visiting her aunt. She's the daughter of General Philip Schuyler, one of New York's wealthiest and most powerful men. She's intelligent, warm, from exactly the kind of established family Hamilton has always yearned to join. He courts her with letters. Of course, with letters. That's his medium. The prose is different from his military correspondence. Tender, playful, occasionally vulnerable. He calls her my Betsy. She sees past the public performance of confidence to the orphan underneath, the boy still uncertain of his place. Their courtship unfolds through the winter, visits when duties permit, letters when they don't. For Hamilton, Elizabeth represents something he's never had: belonging. The Schuylers are rooted, established, secure in ways he's never experienced. Philip Schuyler is cautious about this match, his daughter and a penniless aide, however talented. But Elizabeth knows her own mind, and by spring, they're engaged. Washington relies on Hamilton more and more. When complex negotiations are needed, Hamilton goes. When Congress needs managing, Hamilton writes. The relationship deepens into something like father and son, though neither would say so aloud. Washington is 45, Hamilton 22. The dynamic is complicated. Affection mixed with formality, trust mixed with hierarchy, the older man's reserve meeting the younger man's intensity. Hamilton chafes sometimes at being a staff officer. He wants field command, wants to lead men in battle, wants glory that can only come from combat. But Washington needs him at headquarters, needs his pen and his mind, the artillery captain, has become something else. The indispensable aide, the voice of command, the ambitious young man learning how power actually works in a republic at war. The relationship between George Washington and Alexander Hamilton begins as pure mutual need and admiration. Washington has found the mind he's been searching for, the aide who can think strategically and write beautifully. Hamilton has found the father figure he's never had, the great man who recognizes his worth. For a time, it works perfectly. Washington dictates thoughts. Hamilton shapes them into prose that moves Congress and inspires generals. They develop a rhythm, an understanding. Washington can be reserved, formal, careful with words. Hamilton is quick, passionate, unfiltered in private. Together, they become a formidable partnership. But underneath, tensions are building. Hamilton is 22, brilliant, hungry for distinction. In the 18th century, for a young man of ambition, glory comes from combat command, not from staff work. Hamilton sees other officers his age leading regiments, earning fame in battle, while he sits at a desk writing other men's orders. He's grateful for Washington's trust, but gratitude breeds its own kind of resentment when it feels like a cage. The work itself is extraordinary. Hamilton drafts reports to Congress on military reform, sketching out ideas for a professional officer corps, for supply systems, for command structure. He writes to congressmen, sometimes flattering, sometimes bluntly critical of their failures to support the army. His letters on behalf of Washington carry weight because everyone knows the commander trusts him completely. But this trust means Washington won't let him go. In December 1780, Hamilton marries Elizabeth Schuyler at her family's mansion in Albany. The wedding is a grand affair, the Schuylers pulling out every stop. For Hamilton, it's the culmination of a romance, but also something more. He's finally, formally, part of an establishment family. He's no longer the orphan, the outsider. He's Philip Schuyler's son-in-law, connected to one of the most powerful political networks in New York. Eliza brings him love, but she also brings belonging. The marriage is deeply happy in its private moments. Eliza is warm, devout, practical. Everything Hamilton isn't. She steadies him, sees through his performances to the insecurity underneath. Their letters, when separated, are tender, playful. He calls her his, quote, zero. She tolerates his ambition while wishing he needed less from the world and more from home. But the tension with Washington is reaching a breaking point. Hamilton has been aide-de-camp for nearly 4 years. He's written thousands of letters, managed countless crises, served faithfully. And he's watched younger, less talented officers gain field commands while Washington keeps him at headquarters. He's asked repeatedly for a regiment of his own. Washington always refuses. "You're too valuable here," he says. "I need you." The explosion comes on February 16th, 1781, at Washington's headquarters in New Windsor, New York. The details are almost absurdly trivial, which makes the rupture more revealing. Hamilton is heading downstairs when Washington stops him. "I wish to speak to you, Colonel Hamilton." Hamilton says he'll return in a moment. He has to deliver a message first. He stops to talk with the Marquis de Lafayette. The conversation runs long, and when he reaches the stairs 10 minutes later, Washington is waiting. Quote 2. Washington says, his voice cold. Quote 3. Hamilton's response is immediate. "I'm not conscious of it, sir, but since you have thought it necessary to tell me so, we part." "Very well, sir," Washington says, "if it be your choice." Just like that, 4 years of partnership end. Over 10 minutes at the top of a staircase. Over nothing, really, except everything that's been building for years. Within an hour, Washington sends an aide to apologize, to smooth things over. Hamilton refuses reconciliation. He's been waiting for this, perhaps unconsciously engineering it. The break gives him what he's wanted: freedom from the desk, the possibility of field command. He agrees to stay at headquarters until a replacement is found, but the intimacy is gone. Washington is hurt, genuinely hurt, by the coldness. He doesn't understand that Hamilton needs to escape, not from dislike, but from overwhelming obligation. Hamilton leaves headquarters in April. He spends the spring and summer of 1781 lobbying for a combat command, writing letters, pulling every string. Washington, still stung, is slow to respond. Finally, reluctantly, he gives Hamilton command of a New York Light Infantry battalion. It's less than Hamilton wanted, but enough. The context here matters. Valley Forge in the winter of 1777 to 78, where Hamilton witnessed the army's near dissolution. Men starving, freezing, deserting in droves while Congress debated and states refused to send supplies. Monmouth in 1778, where Hamilton saw the chaos of battle, the confusion and courage mixed together, the long years of stalemate as the war moved south, as Hamilton chafed at headquarters watching others fight. Now, in the fall of 1781, everything converges at Yorktown. The French fleet has cut off Cornwallis's escape by sea. Washington's army and Rochambeau's French forces have trapped him on the Virginia Peninsula. The British are dug into fortifications, and those fortifications must be taken before the siege can succeed. 2 redoubts, small, fortified positions, anchor the British left flank. They must be captured by direct assault. Washington assigns one to a French regiment, the other to American forces. Hamilton demands to lead the American assault. He pulls rank, argues precedent, refuses to be denied. Washington relents. The night of October 14th, 1781. Hamilton's battalion fixes bayonets and advances in darkness toward Redoubt 10. 400 men against a fortified position held by British and Hessian troops. Hamilton has given strict orders: unloaded muskets, bayonets only. Speed and shock are everything. They cross open ground under fire, reach the fortifications, begin climbing. Hamilton is among the first up and over. The fighting inside is brutal, close, vicious. Bayonets and musket butts, men screaming. The darkness lit by muzzle flashes. Hamilton is everywhere, urging men forward, leading from the front in a way he's dreamed about for 4 years. 10 minutes. That's how long it takes. 10 minutes of pure violence, and Redoubt 10 is taken. The British surrender, the American flag is raised. Hamilton stands in the captured fortification, breathing hard, blood on his uniform, alive with the glory he's chased so long. The siege of Yorktown ends with Cornwallis's surrender on October 19th. The war, for practical purposes, is over. Hamilton is 26 years old. He's been in America for 9 years, fighting for 6. He's married into wealth and position, proven himself in combat, served at the right hand of the commander-in-chief. He's achieved everything a young man in his circumstances could reasonably dream of. And as he watches the British Army march out to lay down their arms, bands playing melancholy tunes, he's already wondering, what comes next? War gave his life focus, direction, meaning. Peace is uncharted territory. He returns to Eliza, to New York, to the question of how to build a life when the grand cause that defined you is finished. The pen and the sword have both served him well, but peace requires different weapons entirely. Alexander Hamilton returns from Yorktown to find that peace feels like anticlimax. The war drags on technically for another year, but the fighting is essentially over. He's back in Albany with Eliza, and for the first time in years, he has no clear purpose. The army will disband. There are no more letters to write for Washington, no more strategic problems to solve. He's 26 years old with a wife, a modest reputation, and no profession. He decides on law. It's the path to influence in peacetime America, and Hamilton approaches it the way he approaches everything, with furious intensity. He studies in Albany through the winter of 1781 to 82, reading Blackstone's commentaries, studying New York statutes, filling notebooks with legal principles and case summaries. Most lawyers study for years. Hamilton compresses the curriculum into months, his mind absorbing precedents and procedures at extraordinary speed. By July 1782, he passes the bar examination. He's a lawyer now, barely. The family moves to New York City in late 1782. The British are evacuating, and the city is in chaos. 7 years of occupation have left it damaged, divided. Loyalists are fleeing to Britain or Canada. Patriots are returning to reclaim property. Everything is unsettled, scores being settled, fortunes made and lost. Hamilton opens a law practice at 57 Wall Street. His first major cases are controversial, defending loyalists. New York has passed harsh laws against those who supported the crown: confiscation of property, denial of legal rights, banishment. Hamilton argues that these laws violate the Treaty of Paris, that they're unjust and short-sighted. He wins some cases, makes many enemies. Patriots who suffered under British occupation don't want to hear about legal niceties protecting traitors. But Hamilton sees something larger. If the new nation doesn't respect rule of law, doesn't honor treaties, what is it worth? What did they fight for? The law practice grows. He's talented, quick, persuasive in court. Money starts coming in, finally. For the first time since leaving the Caribbean, he's financially secure. He and Eliza rent a house, start building a life. Their first child, Philip, is born in January 1782, named for Eliza's father. Domesticity suits Hamilton in ways he didn't expect. He's tender with Eliza, devoted to the baby, trying to be the father his own father never was. But underneath the domestic contentment, political frustration is building. Hamilton watches the Confederation Congress try to govern, and what he sees appalls him. The Articles of Confederation give Congress almost no power. It can't tax, can't regulate commerce, can't compel states to do anything. It can request money from the states, but the states ignore the requests. The national debt is mounting. Money owed to soldiers, to foreign creditors, to suppliers. No one will loan the government money because everyone knows it can't pay. In 1782, Hamilton founds the Bank of New York, one of the first banks in the new nation. It's a practical venture. New York needs credit, needs financial infrastructure, but it's also ideological. Hamilton is developing a vision of how commercial prosperity and national power reinforce each other. He writes essays on political economy, arguing for national taxation, for assumption of state debts, for a commercial republic that can compete with European powers. His thinking is continental, while most Americans are still thinking locally, worried about their state's interest, suspicious of central power. In November 1782, he's elected to the Continental Congress as a delegate from New York. He serves through 1783, and the experience confirms his worst fears. Congress is impotent. Delegates come and go. Often, there isn't even a quorum to conduct business. States send instructions forbidding their delegates from agreeing to anything that might strengthen national government. The army is owed years of back pay, and Congress has no money to pay them. This leads to the Newburgh Conspiracy in March 1783. The army is camped at Newburgh, New York, waiting to disband. Officers are circulating letters suggesting the army should refuse to disband until paid. Perhaps should march on Congress. Perhaps should install Washington as a dictator. It's the closest the revolution comes to military coup. Hamilton is in Philadelphia with Congress, writing letters, trying to navigate the crisis. Washington himself diffuses it, appearing before his officers, shaming them out of mutiny with a speech and a theatrical gesture, fumbling for his glasses, saying he's grown grey in their service and now finds himself growing blind. The crisis passes, but Hamilton sees how close they came to disaster. A government that can't pay its soldiers, can't fund its debts, can't command respect is not sustainable. He writes constantly, letters to Washington, essays under pseudonyms, proposals to Congress. Give the national government power to tax. Create a national bank. Assume the state debts and fund them properly. Strengthen the Union before it collapses. No one listens. The states are too jealous of their prerogatives. Massachusetts delegates fear New York's ambitions. Virginia suspects Pennsylvania's commercial interests. Every proposal for strengthening national authority dies in committee or in state legislatures. Hamilton returns to New York in 1783, exhausted and disgusted. The next years are wilderness. He builds his law practice, makes money, has more children. Angelica is born in 1784, Alexander in 1786. The household grows, Eliza managing everything with calm competence, while Hamilton works obsessively. He's arguing cases, writing briefs, but also watching the national situation deteriorate. The problems compound. States print their own currency, mostly worthless. Interstate commerce is a chaos of different regulations and tariffs. Foreign nations, Britain, Spain, France, treat the United States with contempt. Why negotiate with a government that can't enforce treaties? In Massachusetts, farmers facing debt foreclosure rise in Shays' Rebellion, attacking courthouses. The state militia barely suppresses it. The Confederation Congress can do nothing. Hamilton is elected to the New York legislature in 1786. It's a step down from Congress, but at least the state legislature can actually pass laws. He proposes commercial reforms, argues for national perspective. He's mostly outvoted by men who think New York's interests are separate from the nation's. Then comes the Annapolis Convention in September 1786. Delegates from 5 states meet to discuss interstate commerce. Hamilton attends for New York. The gathering is too small to accomplish anything substantial, but Hamilton sees an opportunity. He drafts the convention's final report with James Madison, calling for another convention, this time to revise the Articles of Confederation entirely. They convince the delegates to issue a call for a constitutional convention to meet in Philadelphia in May 1787. It's an audacious move, arguably exceeding their authority. But the alternative is watching the Union dissolve. Hamilton returns to New York, to Eliza and the children, to his law practice. But he's energized for the first time in years. There will be a convention. There will be a chance to redesign the structure of government. The question that's consumed him since 1781, how to make this republic actually work, might finally get an answer. Not the answer he'd write alone, perhaps, but something. The wilderness years are ending. The next act is beginning. Philadelphia in May 1787 is already hot, and it will only get hotter. 55 delegates gather at the State House, ostensibly to revise the Articles of Confederation. Hamilton arrives from New York, knowing revision won't be enough. The articles are unfixable. The nation needs a completely new structure of government, something that can actually function. He's been thinking about this for years, has his ideas fully formed. He's ready to build something that will last. The convention votes immediately to meet in secret. No newspapers, no observers. Windows kept closed despite the heat to prevent eavesdropping. Guards at the doors. What happens in this room will determine whether the United States survives as a nation or fragments into squabbling confederacies. The secrecy is meant to allow honest debate, to let delegates change their minds without public embarrassment. It works, but the price is summer in a closed room, coats and wigs required, the air thick and stale. Hamilton watches the early debates with growing frustration. Edmund Randolph presents the Virginia Plan, largely Madison's work. A national legislature with 2 houses, representation by population, a strong executive. It's better than the Articles, certainly, but not nearly strong enough for Hamilton's taste. The small states immediately object. New Jersey's William Paterson proposes an alternative. Keep the Confederation structure. Each state gets 1 vote regardless of size. Just give Congress slightly more power. Hamilton listens to weeks of this. Arguments about representation, about state sovereignty, about whether states or people are the foundation of the Union. He thinks they're all missing the point. The real problem is that they're trying to preserve state power when state power is the obstacle to effective government. On June 18th, Hamilton asks for the floor. He speaks for 6 hours. It's the longest speech of the convention, and it will haunt him for the rest of his life. He begins methodically, critiquing both the Virginia and New Jersey plans. Neither goes far enough. The problem with the Confederation is fundamental. Sovereignty is divided between states and nation, and divided sovereignty doesn't work. You need one supreme authority. Then he presents his own plan, the government he believes would actually succeed, an executive elected for life, removable only by impeachment, a Senate elected for life, the national government to appoint state governors with veto power over state laws, the whole structure modelled, more or less, on the British Constitution, which Hamilton argues is the best government ever designed. The room goes silent. This isn't revision. This isn't even radical reform. This is something close to monarchy. Hamilton sees the shock on faces, realizes immediately that he's miscalculated catastrophically. He's been too honest, shown too much of his actual thinking. In this room, full of men who just fought a war against monarchy, he's proposed recreating it. He tries to clarify. He's not suggesting a king, he says. The executive would be elected, accountable. But the damage is done. His enemies will dine on this speech for decades. Even his friends are uncomfortable. Washington, presiding over the convention, is carefully neutral. But Hamilton can imagine his disappointment. No one seconds Hamilton's proposals. The convention moves on as if he hasn't spoken. His 6 hours of eloquence changed nothing except his own political position. He's marked now as the extremist, the crypto-monarchist, the man who doesn't understand Republican government. The lesson sinks in slowly, painfully. Hamilton retreats into silence. He's overplayed his hand completely. His vision was too pure, too theoretical, insufficiently political. Politics, he's learning, is the art of the possible, not the perfect. And the possible is whatever enough delegates can agree on, not what makes the most logical sense. He watches Madison work the room, building coalitions, making small concessions to gain larger points. Madison understands something Hamilton is only now grasping. You win by increments, by compromise, by accepting that half a loaf is better than none. Hamilton has always been impatient with this kind of maneuvering, but now he sees it's essential. The Great Compromise emerges in July, a House of Representatives based on population, a Senate with equal votes per state. Hamilton thinks it's incoherent. Why have representation based on two different principles? But he can see it's the only way to keep both large and small states in the Union. He votes for it, though everything in him resists. The 3/5 clause comes next, and here Hamilton's conscience and his politics clash painfully. Southern states want enslaved people counted for representation, but not taxation. Northern states object. The compromise: count each enslaved person as 3/5 of a free person for both purposes. It's moral obscenity, dressed as mathematical precision. Hamilton hates slavery, has hated it since the Caribbean, has freed the few enslaved people he owned. But he has no power here. The South won't join a union that threatens slavery. So the compromise stands, and Hamilton votes for it, hating it, accepting it. The presidency takes shape through July and August. One executive, 4-year terms, eligible for re-election, chosen by an electoral college. It's weaker than Hamilton wanted, but stronger than most delegates preferred. He can live with it. By September, a document exists. Hamilton has contributed little directly. His June speech marked him as too extreme to lead, but he's worked behind the scenes, supported Madison's positions, helped smooth conflicts. The Constitution that emerges is not what he would have written. It's too weak, leaves too much power with states, has too many internal contradictions. The Senate and House compromise is incoherent. The slavery clauses are morally indefensible. The whole thing might not work, but it's better than the Articles. And the alternative to this imperfect constitution is no constitution at all, is dissolution and chaos. On September 17th, 39 delegates sign. Hamilton signs, knowing he's endorsing something he considers flawed, making a bet that it's strong enough to survive. Benjamin Franklin speaks as the convention ends, pointing to the sun painted on the back of Washington's chair. He's wondered all summer, he says, whether it was a rising or setting sun. Now he knows. It's rising. Hamilton wishes he shared Franklin's certainty. The carriage ride back to New York takes 2 days. Hamilton spends them thinking. The Constitution exists, but it must be ratified by 9 states before it takes effect. New York will be difficult. Governor Clinton opposes it. The state legislature is skeptical. The whole ratification fight might be lost. Hamilton arrives home to Eliza and the children, exhausted and already planning. The Constitution he helped create is flawed, but it must be defended. The arguments against it will be powerful. Too much central authority, too little protection for states, no Bill of Rights. These arguments aren't wrong exactly, but they miss the essential point. This imperfect union is better than no union. He needs to write. That's what he does, what he's always done. Make the case, marshal the arguments, persuade the doubtful. He'll need help. The task is too large for one person. Madison, perhaps. Jay, if he's healthy. A series of essays, systematic and comprehensive, making the case for ratification. The decision crystallizes. He'll defend this constitution he considers inadequate because the alternative is dissolution. Politics is compromise. Perfection is the enemy of good. These aren't natural thoughts for Alexander Hamilton, but he's learning them, accepting them, making them his own. The summer in Philadelphia is over. The real fight is just beginning. October 1787. The Constitution has been published, and the reaction is mixed at best. In New York, Governor George Clinton is mobilizing opposition. The anti-federalists, those who oppose the new Constitution, have powerful arguments. This Constitution creates a consolidated government that will swallow the states. There's no Bill of Rights protecting individual liberties. The presidency is a monarchy in waiting. The Senate is an aristocratic chamber. The whole structure threatens the freedom they just won from Britain. Hamilton reads these arguments and knows they must be answered systematically, comprehensively. Individual rebuttals won't work. What's needed is a complete theoretical defense of the Constitution, essay by essay, explaining how it works and why it's necessary. He conceives the project alone, but knows he can't execute it alone. The task is too large, the deadline too pressing. Ratifying conventions will begin meeting in months. The essays must appear steadily, building momentum, shaping debate. He recruits John Jay first. Jay is respected, moderate, known for careful judgment. He agrees to help. Then Hamilton approaches James Madison, who's in New York for the Confederation Congress. Madison is the intellectual architect of the Constitution, knows its compromises and rationales intimately. He agrees as well. 3 authors, 1 pseudonym. Publius, the Roman consul who helped found the Republic. The name itself is an argument. They're following ancient precedent, building something that can last. The first essay appears in New York's Independent Journal on October 27th, 1787. Hamilton wrote it. The opening is direct. After an unequivocal experience of the inefficiency of the subsisting federal government, you are called upon to deliberate on a new constitution. The voice is authoritative, reasonable, urgent. The Union is in danger. The Constitution is the solution, and the essays will explain why. They establish a punishing schedule. Essays will appear several times a week, sometimes 5 in 7 days. Hamilton is writing the majority. Eventually, he'll author 51 of the 85 essays. Madison writes 29. Jay begins writing, but falls ill after contributing 5. Hamilton and Madison continue alone, dividing topics, sometimes writing separately, sometimes in consultation. Hamilton writes at night, after his law practice closes, after dinner with Eliza and the children. He writes at his desk on Wall Street, the candle burning low, his handwriting getting smaller as exhaustion sets in. He's still appearing in court during the day, still managing his household, still serving in various civic capacities. The pace is unsustainable, but he sustains it anyway. The essays are extraordinary. Federalist number 1 sets the stakes. Can societies establish good government through reflection and choice? Or are they forever destined to depend on accident and force? The question frames everything that follows. Hamilton writes on executive power, on taxation, on the military. His argument is consistent. Energy in the executive is essential to good government. A weak executive can't protect liberty, can't enforce laws, can't defend the nation. The Confederation failed because it had no energy, no power to act. Madison's contributions are equally sophisticated. Federalist number 10, his masterpiece, argues that large republics are actually safer than small ones because factions multiply and counterbalance each other. It's a revolutionary argument, turning conventional wisdom on its head. Federalist number 51 explains the separation of powers. Quote, "The structure itself will preserve liberty because no branch can dominate. The anti-federalists respond in newspapers under their own pseudonyms. Cato, Brutus, Federal Farmer. The debate is sophisticated, conducted at a high intellectual level. Both sides quote Montesquieu, cite historical precedent, make constitutional arguments. Hamilton reads the opposition carefully, adjusts his approach, writes responses that engage their best points. The writing consumes him. Eliza sees less and less of her husband. He's present but absent, mind always on the next essay, the next argument. Philip is 5, Angelica 3, Alexander an infant. They need their father, but he's trying to save a nation. The domestic cost is invisible to the public, but real to the household. Eliza manages with patient grace, but there are limits to patience. By the spring of 1788, all 85 essays are published. They've been collected and reprinted in other states, circulated widely, become the definitive defense of the Constitution. But New York still hasn't ratified. The state convention is called for June in Poughkeepsie, 65 miles up the Hudson from New York City. Hamilton is elected as a delegate, one of 19 Federalists, facing 46 anti-Federalists. The odds are terrible. The convention begins on June 17th. Hamilton speaks on the first day and keeps speaking. His stamina is legendary. He can debate for 5-6 hours without flagging, his voice strong, his arguments precise. He responds to every objection, quotes from Federalist essays, appeals to reason and fear and patriotism. Governor Clinton leads the opposition, backed by Mellington Smith, a skilled debater who makes the anti-Federalist case powerfully. The debates last for weeks. Outside the convention, news arrives of other states ratifying. New Hampshire becomes the 9th state to ratify on June 21st. Technically, the Constitution is now in effect. Virginia ratifies on June 25th. The pressure on New York intensifies. Do they join the new union or stand apart with only North Carolina and Rhode Island as company? Hamilton argues that New York has no real choice. If they reject the Constitution, southern counties will secede and join the Union separately, leaving New York City isolated. Commerce will suffer. The state will be weakened. It's not a threat, he says. It's political reality. The debates slowly shift votes. Mellington Smith, impressed by Hamilton's arguments and the changed circumstances, announces he'll vote for ratification. Others follow. On July 26, 1788, the convention votes, 30 to 27 in favor. 3 votes. The margin is razor thin, but it's enough. New York has ratified. Hamilton returns to New York City exhausted and vindicated. He's 33 years old. In 10 months, he's written 51 essays, totaling perhaps 50,000 words, maintained a law practice, debated at Poughkeepsie for 6 weeks, and helped ensure the Constitution's ratification in the most difficult state. He's proven himself indispensable to the Federalist cause. But success has costs. His legal practice has suffered, clients neglected, cases postponed. His family has been neglected too, and he's made enemies. The anti-Federalists who lost don't forget who beat them. George Clinton particularly resents Hamilton's role. Political opposition is hardening into personal animosity. The Constitution is ratified. The government will begin operating in 1789. Washington will certainly be president. And Hamilton, having helped create this government, having defended it more ably than anyone, naturally wonders, what role will he play in it? Has he done enough? The writing is finished, but the work of building the nation has barely begun. April 30th, 1789. George Washington takes the oath of office on the balcony of Federal Hall in New York City. The crowd watching is euphoric, hopeful, uncertain. The Constitution exists on paper, but now it must become real. Washington assembles his cabinet carefully. Thomas Jefferson, still in Paris, will be Secretary of State. Henry Knox continues as Secretary of War. Edmund Randolph becomes Attorney General. And for the crucial position of Secretary of the Treasury, Washington chooses Alexander Hamilton. He's 34 years old, the youngest cabinet member, about to inherit an impossible task. The financial situation Hamilton inherits is a disaster. The national debt stands at roughly $54 million, an astronomical sum for a nation of 4 million people. There's foreign debt to France and Holland from the Revolution, domestic debt to soldiers and suppliers who are paid in promises, and the continental currency is worthless, a joke. Not worth a continental is already a saying. The government has no revenue system, no way to collect taxes beyond tariffs at ports. No one will loan money to the United States because everyone knows it can't pay. Without credit, the nation can't function. Without revenue, it can't survive. Hamilton attacks the problem with the same intensity he brought to everything else. He works 18-hour days, sleeps 5 hours if that. His office fills with ledgers, correspondence, calculations. He's building a financial system from scratch, and he has models. Britain's funding system, Dutch banking, the commercial theories he's been reading for years, but no blueprint for American circumstances. On January 14th, 1790, he submits his first report on public credit to Congress. It's a comprehensive plan, audacious in scope. The national government will assume full responsibility for all war debts, foreign and domestic. Existing debt certificates, now trading at pennies on the dollar, will be funded at par, full face value. The government will establish regular tax revenue to pay interest on this debt. And here's the crucial part. The debt won't be paid off quickly. Instead, it will be funded perpetually, creating a permanent national debt that ties creditors' interests to the nation's success. The assumption of state debts is the most controversial piece. Some states, particularly in the South, have already paid their war debts. Others, mostly in the North, still carry massive obligations. Why should Virginia, which has paid down its debt, help Massachusetts pay theirs? Hamilton's answer is that these were national debts incurred for national purpose. The war was fought together. The debts should be borne together. The reaction is explosive. James Madison, Hamilton's partner in the Federalist Papers, leads the opposition in the House of Representatives. This feels like betrayal. Madison argues that funding at par rewards speculators who bought up debt certificates from original holders at deep discounts. It's unjust, he says. Hamilton responds that to discriminate between original and current holders would destroy public credit permanently. Who would ever buy government securities if they might later be declared worth less than face value? The assumption plan fails its first vote. Hamilton is desperate. The entire financial system he's designed depends on assumption. Without it, states will compete for revenue. National credit will remain weak. The Union will fracture financially, even if it stays together politically. Enter Thomas Jefferson, newly returned from France to take up his position as Secretary of State. Jefferson is uncertain about the financial debates, more focused on foreign policy. Hamilton approaches him in June 1790, distraught. They need to talk. Jefferson agrees to host a dinner. Madison is invited. 3 men around a table, shaping the nation's future. The compromise that emerges is elegant in its cynicism. Hamilton gets assumption. In exchange, the permanent capital will move to the Potomac River, Southern Territory, Virginia's preferred location. It's pure horse trading, policy and patronage, principle and politics mixed inextricably. Madison brings enough Southern votes to pass assumption. Hamilton delivers Northern support for the Potomac capital. The dinner table bargain saves Hamilton's financial plan and determines where Washington, D.C. will rise from swampland. But Hamilton isn't done. In December 1790, he submits his report on a national bank. He proposes a Bank of the United States modeled on the Bank of England, capitalized at $10 million, with the government owning 20% and private investors the rest. The bank will manage government funds, provide loans, issue currency, stabilize the money supply. It's the keystone of his financial architecture. The opposition is fierce. Madison and Jefferson argue the Constitution doesn't authorize Congress to create a bank. Nowhere in the enumerated powers is banking mentioned. Washington, uncertain, asks his cabinet for written opinions. Jefferson submits a strict interpretation. If the power isn't explicitly granted, it doesn't exist. Hamilton submits a defense of implied powers that will shape constitutional law for centuries. The Constitution grants Congress power to collect taxes, borrow money, regulate commerce. A national bank is necessary and proper to execute these powers. The clause necessary and proper doesn't mean absolutely necessary. It means useful, convenient, appropriate. Washington reads both arguments and sides with Hamilton. The bank bill becomes law in February 1791. The bank is chartered, and when its stock goes on sale, the subscription is oversubscribed in hours. American credit is suddenly real. December 1791 brings Hamilton's report on manufactures, his vision for America's economic future. While Jefferson dreams of an agrarian republic of independent farmers, Hamilton sees factories, cities, industrial growth. He proposes protective tariffs to nurture domestic manufacturing, government support for infant industries, internal improvements to tie the nation together commercially. Congress doesn't adopt the report, but it lays out a philosophy that will eventually triumph. The costs of this achievement are mounting. To fund the government, Hamilton proposes an excise tax on whiskey. It's efficient. Whiskey is widely produced, easy to tax, but deeply unpopular, especially on the frontier, where whiskey is currency and cash crop. The tax breeds resentment that will explode later. Political opposition is organizing into something new, a party. Madison and Jefferson begin coordinating resistance to Hamilton's policies. They fund a newspaper, the National Gazette, to attack him. They recruit allies, build coalitions, develop talking points. Hamilton's economic vision is creating concentrated wealth, they argue, benefiting northern merchants and speculators at farmers' expense. Hamilton responds with his own newspaper attacks, and the Gazette of the United States becomes his voice. At home, Eliza is raising the children essentially alone. Philip is 9, Angelica 7, Alexander 5, James Alexander 3, John Church, born in 1792. Hamilton is home for dinners when he can manage it, affectionate when present, but increasingly absent. Eliza doesn't complain publicly, but the letters she writes to her sister Angelica hint at loneliness, frustration, the burden of managing everything while her husband builds a nation. Hamilton barely sleeps. He's writing reports, managing customs collectors across the nation, dealing with Congress, fighting opposition, planning next steps. His health suffers, fevers, exhaustion, the stress manifesting physically. But he's doing exactly what he's always wanted, building something permanent, creating institutions that will outlast him. By the end of 1791, Hamilton has transformed American finance. The debt is funded, credit restored, the bank established, revenue flowing. He's 36 years old and has achieved more than most statesmen accomplish in lifetimes. But he's also made permanent enemies, divided the government into factions, and set in motion conflicts that will consume the next decade. Success and cost are inseparable, and Hamilton is learning this lesson the hard way. The Republican opposition emerges gradually, then suddenly. Jefferson and Madison, alarmed by Hamilton's financial system and its centralizing tendency, begin coordinating resistance in 1791. They recruit Philip Freneau, a poet and journalist, offering him a State Department clerkship if he'll establish a newspaper to counter Federalist voices. The National Gazette begins publishing in October 1791, and its mission is clear: attack Hamilton's policies and, increasingly, Hamilton himself. The attacks are sophisticated. The Gazette argues that Hamilton's funding system enriched speculators at public expense, that his bank concentrates power dangerously, that his vision of commercial development betrays the revolution's agrarian ideals, that he's secretly a monarchist, never having shed his admiration for British institutions. Some attacks are reasoned policy critiques. Others are character assassination thinly veiled as political commentary. Hamilton can't let criticism stand unanswered. It's a flaw, this inability to ignore attacks, but he can't help himself. He responds in the Gazette of the United States under various pseudonyms. Quote, 0, quote, 1, quote, 2. The essays are brilliant and vicious. He accuses Jefferson of hypocrisy, preaching agrarian simplicity while living in luxury at Monticello. He questions Madison's consistency, reminding readers that Madison co-authored the Federalist Papers defending the very Constitution he now claims to fear. The newspaper war escalates, each side more personal, more bitter. Washington watches this warfare with growing dismay. His cabinet is splitting into factions. His two most brilliant advisors at each other's throats. He tries to mediate, writing to both Jefferson and Hamilton, asking them to moderate their attacks for the sake of national unity. Both men promise to try. Neither succeeds. The enmity is too deep. The philosophical differences too fundamental. Then, in the summer of 1791, something happens that will haunt Hamilton for the rest of his life. A woman appears at his door on a Saturday evening when Eliza is away visiting family. Her name is Maria Reynolds. She's young, perhaps 23, beautiful, distressed. She tells Hamilton her story. Her husband, James Reynolds, has abandoned her. She has no money. She needs help to return to her family in New York. Could Mr. Hamilton, known for his generosity, assist her? Hamilton should have sent money through an intermediary, should have recognized the danger, should have thought of Eliza, of his children, of everything he's built. Instead, he tells Maria he'll bring the money to her lodgings that evening. When he arrives, the transaction that begins is not financial assistance, but adultery. The affair continues through the fall of 1791 and into 1792. Hamilton visits Maria regularly, the recklessness staggering given his position. Then James Reynolds reappears, and suddenly everything is clear. It was a setup from the beginning. Reynolds knows about the affair. He's outraged, devastated, considering violence, unless Hamilton can make amends financially, say $1,000 to start. Hamilton pays. It's blackmail, obvious and crude, but he pays because the alternative is exposure, scandal, ruin. Reynolds demands more money. Hamilton pays again. The payments continue for months. Hamilton trapped in a situation of his own making, unable to break free without destroying himself. He keeps the secret from everyone, even Washington. The guilt gnaws at him. He's betrayed Eliza, the one person who's loved him unconditionally, who's given him the family he never had. He's compromised himself in ways that make him vulnerable to enemies, and he can't stop paying because exposure would end his political career and devastate his household. Meanwhile, the world is catching fire. The French Revolution, initially welcomed by Americans as their own revolution's echo, turns radical in 1792. The monarchy falls. The September massacres horrify observers. The terror begins. Americans divide sharply over France. Republicans, led by Jefferson, see the revolution as a continuation of liberty's advance. Federalists, led by Hamilton, see it as descending into mob rule and chaos. The divide maps onto domestic politics. Those who support Hamilton's economic policies tend to fear French radicalism, while those who oppose him tend to celebrate French democracy. In April 1793, France executes King Louis XVI and declares war on Britain. The new French Republic sends Edmond Charles Genet as minister to the United States, expecting American support based on the 1778 Treaty of Alliance. Washington's cabinet meets to decide, does the United States honor that treaty and join France's war against Britain? Hamilton argues strenuously for neutrality. The treaty was with the French monarchy, which no longer exists. America has no obligation to the revolutionary government. More practically, war with Britain would be catastrophic. American trade depends on British commerce. Tariffs on British goods fund the government. The Navy is too weak to fight. Jefferson argues that honor requires supporting France. that neutrality betrays Republican ideals. Washington sides with Hamilton. The Neutrality Proclamation of 1793 declares the United States neutral in European wars. Genet is furious. He begins commissioning American privateers to attack British shipping, operating from American ports, flagrantly violating neutrality. Hamilton confronts him repeatedly, demanding he cease these activities. Genet appeals directly to the American people over Washington's head, claiming popular opinion supports France. The Genet affair becomes a crisis. Hamilton wants him expelled, sent back to France. Jefferson, though increasingly uncomfortable with Genet's recklessness, tries to protect him. Eventually, Washington demands France recall Genet. Ironically, by the time the demand arrives in Paris, the revolutionary government has changed again, and Genet would face the guillotine if he returns. Washington allows him to stay as a private citizen. He eventually marries the daughter of New York's governor and settles into American obscurity. But the political damage is done. The French crisis has hardened party lines. Republicans accuse Hamilton of betraying France out of British sympathies. Federalists accuse Jefferson of endangering American interests for ideological fantasies. The newspaper attacks intensify. The attacks on Hamilton become increasingly personal. Questions about his birth. Was he really born in 1757 or earlier? Is he actually legitimate, or was the marriage story invented? What about his mother's scandalous past? And more dangerously, is he loyal to America, or does his Caribbean birth make him fundamentally foreign? These attacks wound deeply because they touch his oldest insecurities, the orphan's fear of not belonging. The stress manifests physically. Hamilton suffers recurring fevers through 1792 and 1793. He can't sleep, his mind racing through problems and enemies and secrets. He loses weight, his clothes hanging loose. Eliza worries, but doesn't know the full cause. She sees the political battles, but not the private crisis. The Reynolds payments still continuing, the blackmail still operating. His relationship with Washington deepens, even as enemies multiply. Washington trusts Hamilton completely on financial and commercial matters, values his judgment on foreign policy, relies on his drafting skills. They meet regularly, sometimes daily. Washington becomes the father Hamilton never had, and Hamilton becomes something like the son Washington lost when his stepson died. But Washington is also aware that Hamilton is divisive, that keeping him prominent feeds opposition. The president navigates carefully between his brilliant, combative Treasury Secretary and his idealistic, increasingly hostile Secretary of State. By the end of 1793, Hamilton is exhausted, compromised, surrounded by enemies, keeping secrets that could destroy him. His public achievements are undeniable. The financial system works, American credit is solid, commerce is growing. But the gap between public success and private turmoil is becoming unbearable. He's 38 years old, and he can feel himself fraying. August 1793. Philadelphia is dying. Yellow fever, brought by mosquitoes, breeding in the humid summer heat, spreads through the temporary capital. The symptoms are horrific. High fever, jaundice turning skin yellow, black vomit, delirium. Thousands flee the city. Congress suspends session. The government essentially stops functioning. Those who remain, either too poor to leave or too stubborn, face the pestilence. Hamilton stays. The Treasury Department requires constant management. and he won't abandon his post. Eliza is with him, having brought the children to Philadelphia for the summer. In early September, both Hamilton and Eliza fall ill. The fever hits hard, the weakness total. They're bedridden in their house, while the city outside becomes a charnel house. Bodies pile up faster than they can be buried. Their physician, Dr. Edward Stevens, remarkably, Hamilton's childhood friend from St. Croix, treats them with a controversial method, cold baths and bark extract, rather than the bleeding and purging other doctors prescribe. It works, barely. Both survive, but the recovery is agonizingly slow. Hamilton is too weak to stand for weeks. The fever breaks, returns, breaks again. He loses perhaps 30 pounds from an already lean frame. Even from his sickbed, he tries to work. Letters are brought to him, reports that need review. He dictates responses when he has strength, his voice weak, his mind occasionally wandering in fever. The Treasury can't stop just because its secretary is dying. Revenue must be collected, accounts settled. The machinery he built must keep running. By October, the fever subsides with the cooler weather. Hamilton begins recovering, but the illness has aged him. He's 38, but looks older, more fragile. Eliza recovers more slowly, the disease having hit her harder. The children, thankfully, were sent away before the worst of the epidemic. But the psychological toll lingers. The memory of helplessness, of lying in darkness wondering if morning would come. He returns to work in November, still weak, and walks into a political firestorm. His enemies have been busy during his illness. William Branch Giles, a Virginia congressman allied with Jefferson and Madison, has introduced resolutions calling for investigation of the Treasury Department. The accusations are serious. Hamilton has mismanaged funds, violated appropriations, used money for purposes Congress didn't authorize. The implication is corruption, possibly embezzlement. Hamilton is outraged. He's worked himself to illness and beyond, sacrificed his health and finances for public service, and now they accuse him of theft. He responds with characteristic intensity, producing detailed reports accounting for every dollar. The documentation is overwhelming. Thousands of pages of accounts, receipts, explanations. He works through Christmas and into January 1794, barely sleeping, driving his clerks to exhaustion, matching his own. The House receives his reports in February. They're so comprehensive, so precisely documented, that the corruption charges collapse immediately. The investigation vindicates him completely. But the vindication feels hollow. The accusations have been made publicly, the suspicions planted. His enemies have achieved their real goal, making people question his integrity, creating doubt where there should be trust. And Hamilton knows why they're really attacking him. It's not about Treasury management. It's about the Reynolds affair. James Reynolds has been arrested for fraud, and while in jail, he's been hinting that he has compromising information about the Treasury Secretary. The Republicans don't know the details yet, but they smell blood. The attacks on his financial management are fishing expeditions, hoping to find something, anything, to destroy him. The stress compounds when the Jay Treaty crisis erupts in 1795. John Jay has negotiated a treaty with Britain, resolving various disputes left over from the Revolution. The treaty is flawed. It doesn't address British impressment of American sailors, makes commercial concessions that favor Britain, but it averts war and secures important trading rights Hamilton supports it despite its flaws, because the alternative is war America can't win. The public reaction is explosive. Republicans denounce the treaty as a betrayal, a surrender to Britain. Mobs form in cities, burning Jay in effigy. In New York, Hamilton tries to speak in defense of the treaty at a public meeting. The crowd turns hostile, throwing stones. One hits him in the head. He's forced to retreat, bleeding, humiliated. The mob then burns him in effigy alongside Jay. It's a shocking moment. Hamilton, who's given everything to public service, attacked by the public he's served. The physical danger is real, but the psychological wound cuts deeper. After everything he's done, after building the financial system that's made American prosperity possible, they're throwing rocks at him. By late 1795, Hamilton has had enough. He submits his resignation to Washington, effective January 31st, 1795. The stated reason is financial. He can't support his family on a government salary. His law practice has withered from neglect. He's in debt. All true. But the deeper reason is exhaustion. Physical, mental, spiritual. He's been Treasury Secretary for 6 years, working 18-hour days, fighting constant battles, and the cost has become unbearable. Washington accepts the resignation reluctantly. He needs Hamilton, depends on his judgment, but he understands. The financial pressure is real. Hamilton has 5 children now, a 6th on the way. His public salary is $3,500 a year. His law practice before Treasury was bringing 10 times that. He's been bleeding money for years, living on savings and loans. The family returns to New York. Hamilton reopens his law practice at 26 Broadway. The clients return quickly. He's still the best lawyer in New York, and his government service has only enhanced his reputation in commercial circles. Money starts flowing again. The debts begin to clear. He's home more, present for dinners, able to spend time with Philip, now 13, and the younger children. But he can't stay out of politics. It's not in him to retire quietly. He continues writing under pseudonyms, defending administration policies, attacking Republican positions. When Washington needs help drafting his farewell address in 1796, Hamilton essentially writes it, crafting the arguments against permanent foreign alliances and domestic faction that will define American foreign policy for generations. Eliza watches this pattern with growing frustration. He's resigned from government, but not from politics. He's home, but not fully present. His mind always elsewhere, always fighting some battle. She manages the household with patient competence, raises the children, maintains the social obligations, and wonders when her husband will actually retire from the arena that's consuming him. The children are growing up with an absent father who loves them but can't stop working. Philip is brilliant like his father, already destined for Columbia. Angelica is spirited and clever. The younger ones, Alexander, James, John, William, born in 1797, know their father primarily as a distant figure bent over papers, scribbling furiously, fighting invisible enemies through the night. Hamilton is caught in a trap of his own making. He feels indispensable. Without his voice, who will defend Federalist policies? Without his pen, who will counter Republican arguments? The Republic still needs him, or so he tells himself. But the Republic managed before him and will manage after him. What he can't admit is that he needs the fight more than the fight needs him, that he's defined himself by struggle for so long that peace feels like death. He's 40 years old, in 1797, famous and resented in equal measure, financially recovering but politically embattled, married to a patient woman whose patience has limits. The breaking point hasn't broken him, but it's revealed the cracks, and those cracks will only widen in the years ahead. The threat has been building for years. James Reynolds, released from prison after his fraud conviction, has been shopping information about Alexander Hamilton to anyone who will listen. His former wife, Maria, has disappeared from the story, but James knows the adultery happened, knows Hamilton paid him, knows this information is valuable to Hamilton's enemies. In the summer of 1797, James Callender publishes a pamphlet. Callender is a Republican journalist, a fierce partisan who's been attacking Federalists for years. His new publication, quote, Zero, contains explosive charges. Alexander Hamilton, while Treasury Secretary, engaged in financial corruption involving a man named James Reynolds. The evidence, Callender claims, shows Hamilton speculating in government securities, using inside information, betraying his public trust for private gain. Hamilton reads the accusations and knows immediately what's happened. The payments he made to Reynolds, the blackmail money for the adultery, have been deliberately misinterpreted as corruption payments. Documents showing money changing hands between Treasury Secretary and a known speculator look damning if you don't know the real reason for the transactions. He faces an impossible choice. He can stay silent and let people believe he's financially corrupt. He can issue a general denial, but that won't satisfy critics who have documentary evidence of payments. Or he can tell the truth. The payments were blackmail for adultery, not corruption for financial crimes. His financial integrity is unblemished. His personal morality is in ruins. Most men would stay silent, would calculate that suspicion of financial wrongdoing might fade, that the evidence is ambiguous enough to dispute, that time might diminish the scandal. Hamilton can't do this. The accusation of financial corruption strikes at everything he's built. His entire treasury system depends on trust, on the belief that public finance is managed with integrity. If people think he profited personally from his position, everything he created is tainted. But there's something deeper driving him, something less rational. Hamilton has always controlled his narrative through writing. When accused, he responds with overwhelming documentation. When attacked, he counterattacks with detailed arguments. The idea of letting an accusation stand unanswered is intolerable to him. He has to speak, has to explain, has to control how the story is told, even if the story destroys him. He decides to publish everything. Not a careful statement, not a measured response, but total disclosure. He will admit the adultery in excruciating detail, publish the letters, explain the blackmail scheme, prove his financial innocence by sacrificing his personal reputation. It's an insane decision, but Hamilton convinces himself it's necessary. He doesn't tell Eliza before publishing. Perhaps he's too ashamed. Perhaps he knows she'd beg him not to do it. Perhaps he's so focused on defending his financial honor that he stopped seeing anything else. He writes through July and August 1797, producing a 95-page pamphlet titled Come, quote, 1. It will become known as the Reynolds pamphlet. The opening acknowledges the attacks on his character and announces his intention to defend himself. quote, too. Then he admits everything: the affair with Maria Reynolds, the blackmail by James Reynolds, the payments over months. He includes Maria's letters to him, passionate, semi-literate pleas that read as genuine or brilliantly performed depending on interpretation. He analyzes the blackmail scheme in detail. He proves, through exhaustive documentation, that not a single dollar of government money was misused. He publishes in late August. The pamphlet circulates through Philadelphia, New York, Boston. The reaction is immediate and devastating. His political enemies are delighted. They don't care about the financial vindication. The adultery is far more damaging and far more entertaining. The Republicans had accused him of corruption. He's confessed to something worse. Thomas Jefferson, in private letters, expresses satisfaction that Hamilton has destroyed himself. James Callender, who triggered this, publishes follow-up pieces extracting the most salacious details for wider circulation. The Federalists are shocked and horrified. Hamilton was their champion, their brilliant advocate, their symbol of principled governance. Now, he's admitted to adultery and blackmail and has published private correspondence that no gentleman should expose. Some defend him. The financial integrity is proven, which was the main charge. But many are simply embarrassed. This isn't how their party's leaders are supposed to behave. The public devours it. Sex and politics, power and passion, a cabinet secretary and a con artist's wife. It has everything. The pamphlet is reprinted, excerpted, discussed in every tavern and drawing room. Satirical poems appear. Cartoons circulate. Hamilton's private weakness is now public entertainment. And Eliza has known about the affair for some time. Hamilton confessed it to her years earlier when the blackmail started. Unable to bear the secret alone, she forgave him then, or was trying to forgive him, in the privacy of their marriage. Now he's told the entire world. Her humiliation is complete and public. The letters from Maria Reynolds that Hamilton published include details that no wife should have to read in print, much less know that thousands of others are reading too. The children are old enough to understand. Philip is 15, Angelica 13, Alexander 11. They can read the newspapers, hear the gossip. Their father has publicly admitted to betraying their mother. The younger children, James, John, William, will grow up knowing this story, this stain on the family name. Eliza retreats from public life. She's always been private, uncomfortable with political society, happiest in domestic settings. Now she has reason to hide. Friends don't know what to say. Some offer sympathy, others avoid her, not wanting to acknowledge what everyone knows. The Schuyler family is mortified. Alexander has brought scandal to one of New York's most respected names. Hamilton falls into depression. The law practice continues. Clients care more about legal skill than personal morality, but he moves through days mechanically. He's achieved what he wanted. His financial integrity is beyond question, but the cost is catastrophic. He's destroyed his reputation for virtue, humiliated his wife, damaged his children, given his enemies permanent ammunition. Eliza eventually forgives him again, or decides to stay despite everything. The marriage survives, but it's changed. There's a sadness in it now, a recognition of limits and wounds. Hamilton is more tender with her, more attentive, as if trying to compensate for what he's done. But the damage can't be fully repaired. He becomes obsessed with honor and reputation in a new way. Having lost his reputation for virtue, He's hyper-vigilant about his reputation for courage and integrity in other areas. The Caribbean code of honor he absorbed in his youth, the dueling culture, the idea that insults must be answered, that dignity must be defended, reasserts itself. He's quicker to take offense, more aggressive in defending his name, less willing to let slights pass. The question haunts him in private moments. Was it worth it? He proved he wasn't financially corrupt. But was that worth destroying his family's peace? The Reynolds pamphlet achieved its stated goal. No one questions his treasury management. But it failed at everything else. It was honest, brutally so. But honesty without wisdom is just another form of violence. He's 42 years old, still brilliant, still influential in Federalist circles, but marked permanently by scandal. The orphan who clawed his way to respectability has torn down his own carefully constructed respectability in service of a narrower, more technical vindication, and he'll spend the rest of his life trying to understand whether that choice was courageous or catastrophic. The election of 1800 is vicious from the start. Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr run as Republicans against President John Adams and Charles Pinckney as Federalists. Hamilton, out of office but still influential, campaigns frantically for Adams despite their deteriorating relationship. But his real enemy is Burr, his fellow New Yorker, whom Hamilton considers utterly unprincipled, a man who would say anything to gain power. When the votes are counted in early 1801, the Federalists have lost. But there's a problem. Jefferson and Burr are tied in the Electoral College, each with 73 votes. The Republican electors meant to elect Jefferson president and Burr vice president. But the Constitution doesn't yet distinguish between votes for the two offices. The election goes to the House of Representatives, where each state delegation gets one vote. 35 ballots are required to break the tie. Burr should step aside, acknowledge that Jefferson was meant to be president. He doesn't. He lets Federalist congressmen court him, suggests he might be open to deals. And suddenly, Hamilton faces an impossible situation. The House is controlled by Federalists, his party, and many want to vote for Burr to deny Jefferson the presidency. They ask Hamilton's advice. Support our party, they say. Help us elect Burr. Hamilton can't do it. He despises Jefferson's politics, his agrarian romanticism, his states' rights philosophy. But Jefferson has principles, however wrong Hamilton thinks they are. Burr has none. Quote, Hamilton writes to one congressman, quote, one, to another, quote, two. He writes letter after letter through January and February 1801, lobbying Federalist congressmen to support Jefferson. The arguments are pragmatic. Burr is dangerous because he's ambitious without principle, because he'll do anything for power. Jefferson at least believes in something, can be counted on to act according to philosophy. Better an enemy with principles than a friend without them. His own party turns on him. Federalists accuse him of disloyalty, of betraying their interests for personal vendetta against Burr. Perhaps there's truth in it. Hamilton's hatred of Burr is personal and deep, rooted in years of New York political competition. But Hamilton genuinely believes Burr is a threat to the Republic in ways Jefferson isn't. After 35 deadlocked ballots, Delaware and South Carolina abstain on the 36th, allowing Jefferson to win. The peaceful transfer of power to the opposition party is unprecedented in modern history. Hamilton watches with mixed feelings. His party has lost. His influence is waning. But at least Burr has been denied. Small comfort. He returns to New York, to his law practice, to domestic life. He's 46 years old, and for the first time in decades, he has no official role, no position from which to shape events. The younger Federalists are taking over. His era is ending. Then comes November 1801, and everything else becomes irrelevant. His son Philip, 19 years old, brilliant and beautiful, gets into an argument at a theater. George Eaker, a Republican lawyer, had recently given a speech attacking Alexander Hamilton. Philip and a friend confront Eaker, demanding he explain his insults to Philip's father. Words are exchanged, escalating. Eaker calls them damned rascals. By the code of honor that governs their world, this requires a response. Philip challenges Eaker to a duel. Hamilton learns of it with horror. He knows dueling, has been involved in near duels himself, understands the culture. He advises Philip to withhold his fire, to stand and take Eaker's shot without shooting back. It's what gentlemen sometimes do, proving courage without killing. The other man will then be satisfied. Honor preserved without death. They meet at Weehawken, New Jersey, on November 23rd, 1801, the same dueling grounds where Hamilton will stand 3 years later. Philip follows his father's advice. He goes to his mark, raises his pistol toward the sky. Eaker sees this, interprets it, who knows how, and fires. The bullet strikes Philip in the right side, above the hip, tearing through to lodge in his left arm. Philip is carried back across the Hudson to the house on Wall Street. The doctors can do nothing. Internal bleeding, the wound too severe. He lingers through the night and into the next day, in agony, fading. Hamilton sits beside the bed, holding his son's hand, watching life drain away. Philip dies on November 24th at 4 in the afternoon, 19 years old, dead because of insults to his father's honor, dead because of a code Hamilton taught him to live by. The guilt is unbearable. Hamilton's advice to withhold fire got Philip killed. The code of honor Hamilton absorbed in the Caribbean, carried through life, implicitly taught his children, has murdered his firstborn son. Eliza's grief is beyond description. She collapses, cannot speak coherently for days, withdraws into darkness. The younger children are bewildered, frightened by their parents' devastation. The marriage strains to breaking. Eliza cannot look at Alexander without seeing Philip's face, without remembering that this happened because of who Alexander is, what he represents, the enemies he's made. She doesn't say this aloud, but it hangs between them. Hamilton is destroyed by guilt, by the loss, by watching Eliza suffer and knowing he caused it. In the months after Philip's death, Hamilton makes decisions about retreat. He's been planning a country house on Harlem Heights, northern Manhattan, away from the city. Now he accelerates the plans. The Grange, he calls it, after the Hamilton family estate in Scotland. 32 acres, orchards, gardens, a proper house for a gentleman farmer. It's a fantasy of retirement, of domestic peace, of escape from the political arena that's cost him so much. Construction continues through 1802. Hamilton throws himself into the details, the design, the plantings, the furnishings. It's therapy and avoidance, a way to focus on creation rather than loss. Eliza slowly emerges from grief, still broken but functioning. The younger children need her, and she's always been strong. They moved to the Grange in 1802. It's beautiful, peaceful, everything Hamilton imagined. He can see the Hudson River, watch ships pass, tend his gardens. He's trying to be the father he never was, present for Angelica, Alexander, James, John, William, trying to repair what can be repaired with Eliza. But he can't fully retire. He still practices law, still writes political essays, still advises younger Federalists. The 1804 New York governor's race approaches, and Hamilton can't resist involvement. Aaron Burr is running, and Hamilton opposes him publicly, viciously, using all his rhetorical skill to destroy Burr's chances. Burr loses badly, and he knows who to blame. At the Grange, Hamilton is trying to build a life beyond politics, beyond ambition. But politics won't leave him alone, and his nature won't let him step away. He's yesterday's man at 46, his party declining, his influence waning, his son dead, his wife still mourning, his legacy uncertain. The Grange should be a refuge. Instead, it feels like a waiting room. For what? He doesn't yet know. The Grange rises on Harlem Heights through 1802, timber by timber, room by room. Hamilton oversees every detail with the same intensity he once brought to Treasury reports. The library where his books will live, the parlor where Eliza will receive guests, the 13 gum trees he plants for the 13 states. Everything deliberate, symbolic, meant to last. It's his monument to domestic peace, to the life he tells himself he wants now. The fantasy of retirement is transparent to everyone but Hamilton himself. He's at the Grange, yes, tending gardens and planning orchards, playing the country gentleman. But he's also commuting to his law office in Manhattan, taking cases, writing legal briefs. And he's still writing political essays, still corresponding with Federalist leaders, still unable to resist when the arena calls. The fundamental problem is that Hamilton doesn't know how to not be essential. His identity is built on mattering, on shaping events, on being the voice that changes minds. Retirement would mean accepting irrelevance, and that's a death he can't face. So he lives split between two worlds, the domestic peace at the Grange and the political combat in the city, satisfying neither completely. Eliza watches this with quiet resignation. Philip's death has changed her, hardened something in her, made her less willing to sacrifice everything to Alexander's ambitions. She wants him home, wants him present for the surviving children, wants the retirement he promised when they moved. But she knows by now that her husband's nature won't allow it. She manages what she can and grieves what she can't. The children are growing up in this divided household. Angelica is 17 now, tender and fragile, something broken in her since Philip's death. Alexander is 15, trying to fill his dead brother's shoes, headed for Columbia, just as Philip was. James is 13, John 11, William 6, Eliza, born after Philip's death, named in desperate hope, is 2. They see their father irregularly, intensely, his attention total when present, but his presence never guaranteed. Then comes 1804 and the New York governor's race. Aaron Burr, marginalized in national politics, frozen out by Jefferson's administration, needs the governorship to remain relevant. He's running as an independent, courting Federalist support. Hamilton opposes him with all his considerable rhetorical force. At private dinners, in letters to Federalist leaders, Hamilton calls Burr dangerous, unprincipled, unfit for office. Some of these opinions leak, get published, circulate in newspapers. One letter, written by Dr. Charles Cooper after a dinner where Hamilton spoke, references a still more despicable opinion which General Hamilton has expressed of Mr. Burr. The phrasing is vague, but damning. What opinion is too despicable to write explicitly? Burr loses the election badly. Morgan Lewis wins by crushing margins. Burr's political career is essentially over, and he knows Hamilton's opposition was decisive. In late June, Burr sends Hamilton a letter demanding he either affirm or deny the opinions attributed to him. It's the beginning of an exchange that can only end one way. Hamilton's response is loyally evasive. He can't recall the specific conversation. The word, quote, one is too vague. He needs clarification. Burr sends another letter. The issue is Hamilton's overall pattern of opposing him, of speaking against him for years. Hamilton responds that he can't be responsible for every inference drawn from his political opposition. The letters go back and forth, each more formal, more stilted, following a script both men know by heart. On June 27th, Burr sends the challenge. Hamilton accepts the same day. They set the date, July 11th, 1804, dawn, Weehawken, the same dueling grounds where Philip died. Hamilton tells no one initially. He continues his legal work, continues dinners at the Grange, acts as if nothing is wrong. But he's making arrangements. He updates his will, writes final letters, sets his affairs in order. He's planning to throw away his shot, to fire into the air or not fire at all, to let Burr have his satisfaction without killing him. This is what he advised Philip to do. He has to follow his own counsel. On July 10th, the night before the duel, Hamilton writes letters by candlelight to Eliza, explaining that his conscience is at peace, that he's opposed to dueling on principle, but can't refuse without dishonor. The letter is careful, affectionate, and utterly insufficient for what it needs to say. He writes to his friend Rufus King about financial arrangements for his family. He writes instructions for his second, Nathaniel Pendleton, emphasizing his intention not to fire at Burr. He doesn't sleep. He sits at his desk at the Grange while his family sleeps, writing, thinking, perhaps praying. What goes through his mind in those hours? Does he think of Philip, of standing at his son's bedside, watching him die from a dueling wound? Does he question why he's doing this, why he can't just apologize, why honor demands this sacrifice? Or has he made peace with it, accepted that this is how his story ends, that walking onto the dueling ground is a form of suicide disguised as honor? Dawn comes. He kisses Eliza while she's still sleeping. She doesn't know. He's told her nothing about the duel. He leaves the Grange at first light. His second, Pendleton, meets him. They row across the Hudson, the same water Philip crossed on his last morning. The boat lands at Weehawken, and Hamilton climbs to the dueling ground, a small clearing above the river. Trees providing secrecy. Burr is already there with his second, William Van Ness. The seconds inspect the pistols, pace out the ground, review the rules. 10 paces. Fire when ready. Hamilton takes his position. Burr takes his. The clearing is quiet. Just the river sounds and bird calls. This is where Philip stood, where Philip fell. The symbolic horror of it should stop him, but the code is stronger than sense. What happens next is disputed and will be disputed forever. Both seconds give contradictory accounts. Hamilton's second says Hamilton raised his pistol and fired into the air, deliberately missing. Burr's second says Hamilton aimed and fired first, missing, and Burr fired in response. The physical evidence is ambiguous. What's certain is that Burr's shot strikes Hamilton on the right side, the bullet entering just above the hip, traveling through the liver, lodging in the spine. Hamilton falls immediately. "This is a mortal wound, doctor," he says to the physician who rushes forward. The pain is extraordinary. They carry him to the boat, row him back across the Hudson. Every movement agony. He's taken to a friend's house in Manhattan, not to the Grange. They want to spare the children the immediate horror. Word reaches Eliza. She rushes to him, finds him lucid but dying. The bullet has destroyed his liver, the bleeding internal and unstoppable. There's nothing the doctors can do but give him laudanum for the pain. The children are brought in to say goodbye. Not all of them. The youngest are kept away. But the older ones see their father dying the same death that took their brother. Hamilton lingers for 30 hours, in and out of consciousness. When lucid, he's tender with Eliza, tells her she's been the best of wives. He asks for communion, though the Episcopal bishops initially refuse. He's dying from a duel, which the church condemns. Eventually, Bishop Moore relents, administers the sacrament. July 12th, 1804, 2 in the afternoon. Hamilton loses consciousness for the last time. Eliza is holding his hand. The children are near. He dies at 49, everything unfinished. The financial system he built works, but the Federalist Party is dying. His children are fatherless. His wife is a widow. The Grange, his monument to domestic peace, is mortgaged and will be lost. In the room where he dies, Eliza begins the grief that will last 50 years. Outside, New York is learning the news, reactions dividing along party lines even before the body is cold. And across the river at Weehawken, the dueling ground is empty again, the grass stained, the clearing keeping its secrets. The funeral procession moves through Lower Manhattan on July 14th, 1804. The city has essentially shut down. Shops are closed, bells toll from every church, buildings are draped in black. The casket is carried from the house where Hamilton died to Trinity Church, where he'll be buried. Thousands line the streets, silent or weeping, watching the man who built American finance carried to his grave. The attendance is remarkable. Gouverneur Morris delivers the eulogy, calling Hamilton, quote, "Political enemies attend, uncomfortable but present, unable to ignore the moment. The Society of the Cincinnati marches in full regalia. Revolutionary War officers, Hamilton's brothers in arms, the merchants whose commerce depends on Hamilton's financial system, close their exchanges. Even some Republicans who fought him for years acknowledge that something important has ended. But the tributes are complicated, divided by party. Federalist newspapers mourn a genius cut down, a statesman murdered by political hatred. Republican newspapers are more circumspect, acknowledging his abilities while noting his divisiveness. The immediate reassessment has begun. Was Hamilton a visionary or a would-be tyrant? A builder of prosperity or a tool of wealthy interests? The question will echo for centuries. Aaron Burr's destruction is swift and total. He's indicted for murder in both New York and New Jersey, though never tried. His political career is over. He's vice president until March 1805, but completely isolated, toxic. He flees west, gets involved in shadowy schemes about separating Western territories, gets tried for treason in 1807 and acquitted. He spends years in Europe, returns to New York in 1812 to practice law in obscurity. He lives until 1836, long enough to see Hamilton's reputation rehabilitated, while his own name becomes synonymous with treachery. He rarely speaks of the duel in his final years. But when he does, he shows no remorse. Eliza Hamilton is 47 when Alexander dies, left with 7 children and crushing debt. The Grange is mortgaged. Hamilton's law practice generated income, but he spent it faster. And there's no government pension for cabinet secretaries' widows. She's financially desperate in ways that would horrify the Schuyler family of her youth. Her first concern is immediate survival. Friends organize a subscription to help, raising funds for the widow and children. It's charity, and it stings. But Eliza accepts it because the children need feeding. She fights for a government pension, writing letters to Congress, marshalling Hamilton's old allies to support her claim. It takes years, but eventually, Congress grants her a pension, the same amount they give to Revolutionary War widows, acknowledging Hamilton's service. But her larger project is protecting Alexander's legacy. She begins immediately, going through his papers, deciding what to preserve and what to destroy. She burns letters. How many, no one knows. Certainly personal correspondence. Probably political letters she deems too controversial. Possibly evidence of affairs beyond the Reynolds scandal. She's curating his memory, controlling the narrative before biographers can tell their own versions. When biographers approach, and they come soon, Hamilton being too important to ignore, Eliza grants interviews carefully. She tells stories about his devotion to family, his principles, his service. She downplays controversies, emphasizes achievements, shapes how researchers understand him. She's fiercely protective, quick to challenge any portrayal she finds unfair. The Reynolds pamphlet haunts her, but she doesn't discuss it. Some humiliations are too deep to revisit. In 1806, she moves from the Grange, it's sold to pay debts, to a smaller house in Manhattan, then eventually to Washington, D.C., where she lives near her daughter Eliza. In 1821, she returns to New York and founds the first private orphanage in New York City. It's her great work, the channeling of grief into service. She's been orphaned by Alexander's death in a sense, and she understands orphans, what they need, how they struggle. The orphanage becomes her life's focus for the next 20 years. She raises funds, manages operations, visits the children, ensures they're educated and trained for trades. She's in her 60s, then 70s, then 80s, still working, still active. The orphan's wife caring for orphans. There's a symmetry to it that she perhaps recognizes. The children's fates vary. Alexander Jr., groomed to replace his dead brother Philip, becomes a lawyer, moderately successful, but haunted by his father's shadow. James serves in the army, dies at 32. John becomes a lawyer, lives quietly. William studies law and medicine, dies at 27. Little Eliza, born after Philip's death, grows up gentle and kind, marries well. But Angelica, the eldest daughter, never recovers from Philip's death. Her mental state deteriorates over years, some calling it madness, others severe depression. She lives most of her adult life unable to function independently, cared for by family, dying at 73, never having married, broken by grief that began at 17. Hamilton's reputation shifts with political currents to Jeffersonian Republicans and later Jacksonian Democrats. He's the villain, the would-be monarchist, the friend of banks and aristocracy, the man who didn't trust the people. To National Republicans and later Whigs, he's the hero, the visionary of American economic power, the builder of institutions, the defender of energetic government. Henry Clay invokes him constantly. Daniel Webster claims his mantle. The debates Hamilton had with Jefferson continue through proxy in each generation. In 1834, Eliza commissions her son, John Church Hamilton, to write a proper biography. It appears in stages through the 1830s and 1840s, eventually reaching 7 volumes. It's hagiography, frankly, defensive of Alexander, harsh on his enemies, but also preserving documents and details that might otherwise be lost. The family's version of Hamilton takes hold through this work, shaping how 19th century America understands him. Eliza outlives nearly everyone from Alexander's generation. She outlives Jefferson, who dies in 1826. She outlives Madison in 1836. She outlives Burr in 1836, though they never speak after the duel. She watches the nation Hamilton helped create expand westward, industrialize, divide over slavery. She sees the political arguments he had with Jefferson continue in different forms. She witnesses the fulfillment of some of his visions, the industrial economy, the powerful banks, the national infrastructure, and the rejection of others. She's 97 years old when she dies in 1854, having outlived Alexander by 50 years. She never remarries, never seriously considers it. She's Elizabeth Hamilton for half a century of widowhood, defined by the relationship that ended when she was 47. In some ways, she's frozen in 1804, forever the widow grieving, protecting, remembering. Her final years are spent in Washington with her daughter. She's lucid until near the end, telling stories about Alexander, about the Revolution, about when the nation was young. She's a living link to the founding generation, one of the last surviving. People visit like she's a museum, asking about Washington, about Jefferson, about the early republic. She dies on November 9th, 1854. The funeral is smaller than Alexander's. She's outlived her generation, and the nation's attention is on Kansas, Nebraska, on slavery's expansion, on conflicts that will soon explode into civil war. But those who knew her recognize what she accomplished, keeping her family together through poverty and grief, raising her children alone, protecting her husband's legacy, building an orphanage that will serve thousands. She's buried next to Alexander at Trinity Church, the reunion 50 years delayed. The inscription is simple: Elizabeth Hamilton, relict of Alexander Hamilton. Relict, an archaic word meaning widow, but also meaning remnant, something left behind. She was both, the woman left behind and the keeper of what remained. The orphanage she founded continues operating until 1916, eventually serving over 3,000 children. The financial system Hamilton built still structures American commerce. The arguments he had still echo in politics. And Eliza's 50 years of widowhood, of fierce protection and careful curation, ensured that history would remember him not just as Jefferson's opponents wanted, as a monarchist and elitist, but in the full complexity she knew. Brilliant and flawed, visionary and reckless. The immigrant orphan who built the architecture of American prosperity and died too young. Killed by the honor code he could never escape. The Civil War comes 7 years after Eliza's death, and it vindicates Hamilton's most fundamental argument. The Union must be indivisible. Federal power must be supreme. The Confederacy bases its claims on state sovereignty, on the right to nullify federal authority. Exactly the philosophy Hamilton fought against for decades. The Union's victory is, in a sense, Hamilton's posthumous triumph. strong federal government, national supremacy, the idea that we are one nation rather than a league of states. These Hamilton principles win on the battlefield. Abraham Lincoln never met Hamilton, but absorbs his philosophy through Whig politics and Henry Clay's nationalism. Lincoln creates a national banking system during the war, issues a national currency, greenbacks replacing the chaos of state banknotes, and uses federal power to unprecedented degrees. When Lincoln speaks of preserving the Union, of government of the people and for the people, he's echoing Hamilton's vision of energetic national government serving common purpose. The Republicans claim Hamilton as their intellectual founder, the visionary who saw what the nation needed before the nation itself understood. The Gilded Age that follows the Civil War is Hamilton's era in spirit. Industrial capitalism, national corporations, Wall Street finance, protective tariffs, internal improvements linking the continent by rail, all policies Hamilton advocated. His face appears on currency. His statue rises in front of the Treasury Department he founded. Business leaders invoke him constantly, claiming his endorsement for their enterprises. Wall Street adopts him as patron saint, the architect of American prosperity. But this adulation is double-edged. The same forces celebrating Hamilton also reveal his vision's darker implications. Massive inequality, concentrated wealth, political corruption, the sense that government serves capital rather than citizens. Critics point to these outcomes and blame Hamilton's philosophy. Did he intend this? Would he celebrate robber barons and trusts? Or would he recoil at how his ideas were weaponized to justify plutocracy? The questions have no clear answers because Hamilton exists only in his words, frozen in 1804, unable to clarify or revise. The progressive era brings reassessment. Reformers like Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson acknowledge Hamilton's nation-building genius, but question his elitism, his distrust of popular democracy, his comfort with inequality, his vision of government by the talented few. These sit poorly in an age demanding broader participation. Progressive historians depict him as brilliant but dangerous, a man who never quite trusted ordinary people to govern themselves. The celebration dims, becomes more qualified, more critical. The New Deal in the 1930s resurrects Hamilton's precedents for federal power. Franklin Roosevelt's massive expansion of government authority, his creation of new agencies and programs, his use of federal spending to combat depression, all echo Hamilton's arguments for energetic government, addressing national problems. The Supreme Court battles over New Deal constitutionality. Replay debates Hamilton had with Jefferson about implied powers and necessary and proper interpretations. Hamilton's constitutional theory, dormant during decades of limited government, becomes suddenly relevant again. But FDR himself is ambivalent about Hamilton, more comfortable claiming Jefferson's democratic rhetoric while using Hamilton's governmental methods. The New Dealers need Hamilton's tools, but prefer Jefferson's language. It's a revealing split. Americans want strong government when it serves their interests, but resist admitting they want it, preferring to frame federal power in Jeffersonian terms of popular will. The Civil Rights Movement reveals Hamilton's complicated relationship with slavery and race. His opposition to slavery was genuine. He was a founding member of the New York Manumission Society, advocated for gradual abolition, freed the few enslaved people he owned. But he also compromised with slavery repeatedly. The 3/5 clause, the fugitive slave provisions in the Constitution, the Assumption Deal that strengthened slaveholding states. Was he an abolitionist or an appeaser? Did his compromises enable slavery's continuation, or were they necessary to build a union that eventually ended it? These questions resist simple answers, and African American scholars divide on Hamilton's legacy, some seeing him as ally, others as enabler of white supremacy. The late 20th century brings scholarly rehabilitation. Forrest McDonald's 1979 biography reclaims Hamilton for conservatives, emphasizing his realism versus Jefferson's romanticism. Ron Chernow's 2004 biography reaches broader audiences, presenting Hamilton as visionary immigrant, self-made man, the American dream personified. Academic consensus forms around his financial genius, his constitutional influence, his importance as state builder. The verdict isn't unanimously positive. Questions about elitism and democracy remain, but historians increasingly acknowledge his centrality to American development. Then comes 2015, and everything changes. Lin-Manuel Miranda's musical Hamilton transforms him from historical figure to cultural phenomenon. The immigrant story resonates in an era of immigration debates. The multiracial casting reclaims the founding for people excluded from its original telling. The hip-hop score makes 18th century politics urgent and contemporary. Suddenly, Hamilton is everywhere, on magazine covers, in classrooms, the subject of think pieces and academic conferences, and tourism to Trinity Churchyard. The musical's Hamilton is heroic but flawed, brilliant but self-destructive, a protagonist in his own tragedy. It emphasizes his immigrant origins, his rise from nothing, his fatal inability to let grudges go. "Why do you write like you're running out of time?" the chorus asks, and the answer, because he knows he is, because orphans learn early that nothing is guaranteed, resonates across centuries. But the musical also provokes backlash. Critics note it soft pedals slavery, makes founders of color without addressing how they excluded people of color, celebrates American exceptionalism while eliding American sins. The debates become debates about America itself. Can we celebrate founding achievements while acknowledging founding crimes? Can immigrants of color claim founders who owned slaves? These questions have no resolution because they're about present identity as much as past history. Standing at Hamilton's grave in Trinity Churchyard today, Lower Manhattan rises overhead, glass and steel towers housing the financial institutions he pioneered. The New York Stock Exchange operates blocks away. The Federal Reserve Bank manages the currency system he envisioned. The Treasury Department he founded still shapes economic policy. In physical, institutional terms, his legacy is everywhere. But the deeper questions remain unresolved. Was Hamilton visionary or elitist? Both, clearly. But which mattered more? Was he a nationalist, building necessary government, or a crypto-monarchist threatening democracy? Did his compromises with slavery make union possible or prolong the institution? Was his distrust of popular will, prescient realism, or dangerous elitism? These debates continue because they're not really about Hamilton. They're about us, about what we think government should do, how we balance order and liberty, whether we trust ourselves to govern collectively. Hamilton raised questions every generation must answer. What do we owe to each other beyond our immediate community? How do we balance individual freedom with collective good? What power should government have and who should wield it? Can we build institutions that outlast us? Or does each generation start anew? The questions persist because they're fundamental to Republican government, because there are no permanent answers, only choices each era makes based on its circumstances and values. The man who died at 49 has been dead for over 2 centuries, but the arguments continue. He would probably be pleased. He loved argument, believed in the power of debate, thought truth emerged from contention. He'd be surprised by some outcomes. The universal suffrage he doubted, the racial equality he couldn't imagine, the economic scale beyond his conception. He'd recognize other patterns, the federal-state tensions, the debates about debt and taxation, the difficulty of balancing liberty and order. Hamilton's immortality isn't heroic in the simple sense. He's not universally beloved, not beyond criticism, not a figure of pure inspiration. His immortality is argumentative, generative, provocative. Each era resurrects him for its own purposes, claims him for its own debates, finds in his life and work evidence for whatever it wants to prove. That's a different kind of legacy than he imagined. Less marble monument, more ongoing conversation. But perhaps that's the highest form of immortality. Not to be remembered perfectly, but to remain relevant. Not to be resolved, but to keep generating questions worth asking. Hamilton built institutions that endure, but more importantly, he articulated problems that persist. And as long as we're trying to balance liberty and order, individual and collective, present need and future obligation, his voice will matter in the conversation, arguing, insisting, writing like he's running out of time.